Now, every single time I've been in a presentation in the audience and a speaker has got up in this slot, 12 o'clock, 11:30, they always say the same thing. I'm standing between you and lunch. I'll be quick. I've never said that, but I thought, hang on, I'll say it today because we're on an aeroplane. And if you've had aeroplane food as bad as I've had, you may want me to go on for 2 hours or longer. I'm not going to. Okay. So, by the way, has anyone seen the film, Snakes on a Plane? In rehearsals, what they do, I've seen them, they feed them through the windows at 3 o'clock. Anyway, sorry for the corny jokes about aeroplanes. There are so many, and I've only got half an hour, so I've really got to crack on and stop fooling around. Okay, so DE-CIX asked IDC to conduct a survey of large enterprises, 1,000 employee-plus companies, in 5 industry sectors: automotive, banking, media, software, and IT services. And the topic of the survey was to understand what the technology-related challenges were that each industry is facing, the technology that they are deploying to help solve those challenges, and most importantly, to get their thoughts on the proposition that DE-CIX is working on, something that they call interconnection ecosystems. We want to understand how companies in these sectors believe that an interconnection ecosystem can help them solve their challenges, grow their revenue, and so on. Now, another thing I should say is that it doesn't seem a terrible coincidence that every time an analyst, a market analyst like IDC and other analyst companies are available, stands up and presents the results of a survey, they always seem to agree with what the client wants to say. Now, we're not meant to say that. Okay. I can personally verify that that is not always true. I have stood up and given presentations, more than one, that present the results of a survey that we did for a client, where the results do not agree in any way, shape, or form with what the client wanted to say. I have personally stood up in a venue like this, not quite as posh as this, and have been talking about what companies think of IPVPNs was the topic that I have in mind. And every question that we asked, the company said, no, don't want that. No, disagree, we don't think that's important. And so I've had to give these presentations thinking, oh God, what can I say? These results are awful. Now, the fact that I'm saying that, I think, gives the game away that we don't have that unhappy situation here. Okay, so I'm giving the game away right at the start. We have the results from a survey that show very strongly that interconnection ecosystems, which I'm about to define, have a real place to play in the challenges and problems that companies face, and we'll see how in a moment. Okay, so we're going to look at those challenges first of all. Then we're going to look at the technology that companies are using to try and solve them. And then most importantly, we're going to talk about ecosystems and what companies and prospective users of ecosystems think about them and what they want from them. Okay, but first, what do we mean by interconnection ecosystem? Okay, so DE-CIX asked me to put a little definition in at the start. Okay, now if you want the full 50-slide technical definition of an interconnection ecosystem, talk to DE-CIX. I keep it very, very simple. An ecosystem is a physical venue where consumers of services and suppliers of those services physically, in some form, connect to exchange those services and to pay for them. It's as simple as that. Now, this physical venue could be a data center. It could be some other form of physical location where this interconnection happens. And because it's happening in a physical space, it has certain benefits attached to it, such as security. The amount of business conducted over the public internet is huge. The amount of cloud traffic that transits the public internet is enormous. Most public cloud consumption happens over the public internet. For many applications, that's fine. But if you need security, if you need to avoid the possibility of a distributed denial of service attack, if you need any kind of guarantee on latency, if you have any kind of real-time application, if you want any kind of SLA or performance guarantee at all, the public internet doesn't cut it. So, okay. And a little picture just to, again, in my very, very simple-minded way, just to illustrate this. Okay, so we are moving from a situation whereby a company connects to the services they consume over, as I said, the public internet, these red lines, to a situation where companies connect to the physical venue that manages the interconnection between the services that the customer wants to consume. Okay, that really is Ecosystem 101. If you want Ecosystem 102, DE-CIX will give you the 50 slides. Okay, so now let's look at the challenges by industry. Like I said, we got 5 industry sectors that we looked at. Now we asked them about a range of topics. Each list of options was specific to each industry, so we didn't want to go with a generic list of, are you concerned about cost, are you concerned about, etc. So we put to finance companies a list of 12 or 13 issues. And I'm not going to show them all here for the sake of clarity and time, but you can imagine the kinds of things that they were. Things like high-frequency trading, governance and compliance, mobile payment systems, all these kinds of things. So I'm just going to show the top 2 issues that finance companies are most challenged by. Okay, so to use the cliche, these are the things that keep IT leaders in finance companies awake at night. The title gives it away. Both of the top 2 items are related to security. Security is a huge issue in the banking industry and finance in general. Obviously, it's important to every company, but every bank that we talk to, and we have analysts who only do banking and who only do insurance and other financial services, and they tell me that every conversation they have with a client of theirs, a banking client of theirs, security is the #1 topic, even if the meeting or the briefing has nothing to do with security. The threat landscape is changing and evolving so fast that the banks can't keep up, customers can't keep up, fintech suppliers can't keep up. Malware, phishing, DDoS, distributed denial of service, the big breach. Okay, so the major attack that sees serious financial harm being conducted. This is happening to banks right now. Recently, Tesco Bank in the UK had a breach that saw 20,000 of its customers, their accounts were breached or hacked and money taken out. Now, apart from coming to some kind of physical harm, that's almost the worst thing that could happen if you think about it. Your bank account is hacked into and your money is stolen. AI bots pretending to be customers, fraudulently conducting transactions that to the bank look real. This is scary stuff. Number 2 issue the banks are concerned about. Again, I mentioned it's security. This is as simple as it gets. This is so simple. And these are banks. These companies are meant to have the most secure networks and IT systems in the world. Simply procuring secure connections to third parties in order to transact services between them is the second biggest technology-related challenge that banks are facing now. Now, for DE-CIX, this is fantastic. This is gold for DE-CIX. This is what an interconnection system is, connecting to third parties over secure networks. That's exactly the problem that platforms like DE-CIX is proposing aim to solve. Now, we've always had this idea that banks are super clever, super in charge of technology. I remember 10, 15 years ago, we tried to sell research to banks on the evolving market for managed services, IPVPNs. That was the area that I looked at that time, IPVPNs. And as a whole, the banks said, no, we're not interested in that. We employ armies. We've got whole armies of IT people. We've got so much money to throw at IT. We do everything in-house. We employ the best physics grads to run and develop our quant trading systems. We employ the best in the IT industry because we can afford it. Now, that's no longer true. That's no longer true at all. We're seeing use of cloud services by banks growing very, very fast and really catching up with most other industries, because post-2008, banks are not as rich as they used to be. We recently conducted what we call a maturity scape, which is a simple tool based on research, primary research, that lets organizations in a particular industry score themselves in terms of how mature they are in the use of a certain technology. And we did this on banks. This was actually in Asia, but I believe the results are similar in Europe and the US. And it was on next generation security. Okay, so the kind of cybersecurity defense mechanisms that banks need to protect them from all this stuff going on. Now, like I said, 10, 15 years ago, I would have expected banks to be absolutely at the top of the scale. Yeah, we've got this covered. It's so important, it's so critical, and we've got so much money to throw at it. It's done. The shocking result was that banks rated themselves low down on the maturity scale to such an extent that it looks like they have a real problem. So that's banking. What about the media industry? Okay, again, the title gives it away. Big data, AI, global collaboration. So what does that mean? Well, the number one issue for media companies in terms of handling their problems and solving their problems using technology is algorithmic content, data-driven content. Now, out of all the industries we spoke to, there was a range of, distribution of responses as you would expect. The top issue was up here, the second issue was a little bit down. For media, it was a little bit different. This is a huge issue for media companies, way above all other issues. So what does it mean? Well, we can break it down. What does algorithmic content mean? We can break it down into a number of areas. One, algorithmic or machine intelligence assisted decision making. For example, predicting demand for certain programs, for certain types of content, the response rates that the media company gets back from those programs and content. Being able to predict that in advance is, of course, a huge benefit to media companies in terms of their resources, their planning, and so on. But more interesting than that is using advanced analytics, machine learning, etc., to schedule media programming, to personalize content, to recommend content. Now, cloud native or internet native media companies like YouTube have been doing this from the start, but traditional media organizations that still account for most of the industry are really struggling with this. They need to do it. They know they need to do it, and they don't quite know how. And then on to the really exciting stuff. Okay, so this begins to get into the area that Dr. Andreas was talking about with neural networks. How can you apply the current crop of neural networks, like deep learning, so deep neural networks that were always a problem in the past have now been tackled. How can you apply these advanced forms of machine learning to actually generate content? Okay, so it's happening now with some spoken and written content. Give you a quick example. Associated Press is using deep learning to generate written articles where the source of the news story is based on some form of structured data. So, for example, corporate earnings reports, sports commentary, anything where there is some data that an algorithm can grab hold of, it can turn into text that looks readable. Okay, now that's not a small deal. That's a big thing, to actually generate text that doesn't look like it's written by a clumsy algorithm, but actually reads like it's written by a human. Okay, and then you can see, we're just going to go further and further. Written text is one thing. Spoken text, to speak that text, is another. But then to go further than that and look at things like video generation. A couple of years ago, Google, or Google's DeepMind acquisition that does deep reinforcement learning, published the results of what it calls deep dreams. You probably saw it. It was kind of big thing in the press at the time, which is using these deep neural networks to generate images of the connections it's making inside the network, called deep dreams, because it's like a form of dreaming, and it's extraordinary. If you haven't seen them, I really do recommend just search for deep dreams. You get this surreal and very interesting form of video, essentially, being created from scratch. And the other thing that media companies are concerned about, this is a little more prosaic, okay? This is all about the network, and it's about how to connect globally dispersed virtual teams to do post-production, special effects, CGI, film editing. Now, you think of a typical Hollywood film or movie, you know, the size of these files is colossal. And most media companies have put up with very simple but expensive point-to-point connections, if they can afford it. Or many run these files over their carrier's MPLS network, again, very expensive. Automotive, working with partners to deliver driverless cars. So there are several factors relating to the top concern of automotive companies, which is vehicle-to-vehicle communications. Okay, so think about vehicles driving on the road, either autonomously or with a human driver, but with a driver assist system helping the driver. The challenge in making vehicles communicate with each other in a reliable and secure way, given that what we're talking about is absolutely safety critical, is a serious challenge. It's a challenge that will be overcome. But getting there is very, very hard, partly because producing good, robust, reliable, safe and secure vehicle-to-vehicle communication systems brings in many different factors, okay? You've got the simple communication between the vehicles. Okay, that standard is being worked on. The spectrum is being assigned. It's happening on a country-by-country basis. Ensuring that communication is real-time, low latency. Okay, that's being worked on. That's a technical factor. But the vehicles need to communicate with local authorities, with policymakers, law enforcement, roadside infrastructure. This could vary, not just between countries, but between metro areas within countries. And so it needs things like local edge computing or mobile edge computing. So as the vehicles drive past, base stations are providing compute and analytics services to those vehicles, because not everything can be handled on board with the on-vehicle sensors and devices. It needs connections back to centralized platforms in the cloud. to store, log, and audit, to communicate with some local authorities, some law enforcement, that won't have its own infrastructure at the edge. It'll be in the cloud. So this vehicle-to-vehicle communication, we're beginning to see it now. It'll enable things like platooning. You know platooning? When you have fleets of vehicles, like lorries traveling very, very close to each other down the motorway or the autobahn, centimeters apart, potentially dozens of them in advance. So when that comes, good luck if you ever want to exit the motorway. And you're in the middle lane. And then, of course, collaborating and sharing data with partners. Again, like the finance companies that say they just need secure connectivity to third parties, this challenge, this problem that auto companies have is made for some form of interconnection ecosystem to solve. Right, 2 more, and then we'll move on to the exciting stuff. Software companies, user analytics, and rapid development. Okay, so why those 2 items? Software companies need to better understand customer and user behavior. Okay, so why is that? Why is that? Never used to be the case in the past. You used to write software, put it on CD, ship it, and that was it. Well, everything is mobile, everything is real time, everything is instant feedback. App stores are some of the most hyper-competitive places in the technology landscape. Google, App Store, Play Store, and so on have literally millions of apps, all competing with each other. So software developers need to understand how their software, how their apps are being used, what works in the user interface, what doesn't, what really ticks users off, what drives them away from the app and onto a competitor's. And they can get some of that feedback real time. They can get some of it through what sort of batch-oriented processing, if you like. And they're using that, again, it comes back to machine learning and AI. They're putting all this data, as Dr. Andreas was talking about, through advanced algorithms to really work out what is working and what's not. That's top of mind for software companies right now. And then second is a slightly more traditional driver or challenge. How to write applications that are personalized or bespoke, high speed, low cost. Well, how do you do it at high speed? Short of employing 1,000 developers when you only need 10. Well, you do it by accessing modules, libraries, microservices, etc., provided by third parties in some form of environment where you know you can rely on a secure connection that will get you those services. And the last one, IT services. IT services. Okay, so this is a very broad category, of course, but we talk to, in fact, IDC's research base, or heart, if you like, is talking to the big IT services companies around the world. We spend a lot of time with them. And a huge issue for them that is very, very evident from the discussions that we have is their need to move away from a monolithic project-based approach to the market. Throwing people at the problem doesn't scale, very expensive, little margin in many cases. Moving from that traditional project-based style of service delivery to something that looks more like software. Something that's built or assembled from component parts quickly, agilely, if that's a word, flexibly, cheaply. And to do that, they need to move to cloud infrastructure, of course. Okay, so that's the problem, What about the solution? That's the interesting thing. Well, we asked about simple adoption question. Which of these technologies do you use now? Which will you use in 2 years? Which you have no interest in, etc. And we asked about quite a long list of technologies. Things like 3D printing, robotics, blockchain, augmented reality. Basically, we gave them a list of buzzwords. And the results are very interesting to look at by industry and by country. But I'm only going to show the big ones here, the top three, okay? So these technologies are the ones that are driving, and I've carefully avoided using the phrase digital transformation. I don't think anyone's mentioned it so far. Okay, I've said it. These are the technologies that are driving digital transformation. Cloud, what a surprise. Okay, cloud. Everyone uses SaaS. Yeah, okay, well, most companies do. It's not quite all. We haven't quite got 100% penetration. It's getting there. How fast it's getting there is a point of great debate. And we have debates internally, as I'm sure every company does, whereby some analysts in IDC and other analyst companies are available, are insistent that all software will move to the cloud, will be delivered via a SaaS model. We call them the cloud jihadis. Will that happen? Will that happen? I don't know. I don't know. AI and cognitive computing, machine learning, machine intelligence, comes under many different guises. There's so much to say about this that I almost dare not start, because I could rattle on about this for a long time. Suffice to say, my personal view, as well as a professional analyst, is that I think this is the most exciting and society-changing technology that exists today. And the impact over the next generation and beyond is going to be absolutely enormous. I'm not going to dwell on that. We'll come back to that later. I suspect we may come back to that in the panel. And IoT. Okay. So the problem with IoT is that if you need to use it, it's great. If you're doing connected car, if you run a factory, if you have any sort of physical asset base you need to monitor, audit, keep control of, and so on. Brilliant. But it's complex. IoT is complex and costly to implement. It's fiddly. So we're seeing that vendors like Intel, for example, there was the IoT World Congress just a few days ago, I think. And there was a raft of announcements from vendors bringing solutions, IoT-related solutions to market that specifically target the complexity and the cost of using IoT. So Intel, I mentioned Intel, they announced something called the Secure Device Onboarding System that automates the onboarding of IoT devices and sensors. Okay? It doesn't sound very exciting, but it takes out a huge amount of manual work and time and cost and complexity. Now these things, these technologies, they loop back to each other. So IoT is only what we used to call machine-to-machine or machine telemetry if it doesn't have some form of intelligence or produces data that is insightful and impactful in a business sense. So it feeds back to analytics, AI and cognitive. Where is that going to happen? Some of it is going to happen on the device, on the thing of the Internet of Things. But these are low power, small, low capability devices. It's not all going to happen centrally in a central cloud-based analytics, storage, and compute center because of the issue of latency and the cost of backhaul. So analytics platforms are going to appear at the edge, on the premise edge and the network edge. So in mobile base stations. Mobile edge computing, again, is another enabler for some of these technologies. Now, we asked respondents, okay, you're using these things. I didn't read out these numbers because I don't need to. But suffice to say that adoption of all these technologies is increasing very fast. How are you going to implement them, or how are you implementing them? Is it all in-house? Are you building these systems yourself? Are you bringing in a partner or licensing technology to build it on-premise and run it on-premise like you did 20 years ago with Frame Relay and AS400s and so on and so on? And the answer is no for most companies. For some companies it is. For most companies it's not. These figures show the proportion of companies that are using and implementing these technologies by consuming them as services from external third parties. Now, you need to connect to those third parties. So how and where are these technologies accessed? They're accessed in ecosystems. If you don't recognize it, that's an ecosystem. Okay? you have to excuse my lack of PowerPoint skill. It's a little symbolic. It's a little thing. It's an icon. Okay, forget the diagram. We know what an ecosystem is. These are the companies in the 5 segments that we interviewed that are currently taking part in an industry-specific ecosystem. And there's a range. Okay, so software is at the top. No surprise there. Software kind of is an ecosystem. The traditional industries, automotive, to a lesser extent media, are at the bottom. Now, the next part of the story is to say, why are they participating in these ecosystems? Okay, so the story goes on. And we put a number of potential drivers to them. Okay, so these are drivers of companies' ecosystem strategies. I didn't explain the mechanics of how these bars work earlier, but I kind of guess you can see. So critical, the dark blue, lighter blue is important. So basically, these are the number of companies that say, yeah, these things really are important for driving our ecosystem strategy. I'll go through them fairly quickly because there are a few on this chart. Okay, apologies for the text being cut off. We had a little font issue, I think. Rapid or innovative product development. Okay, so applies to software companies. It also applies to automotive companies, manufacturers, finance companies. If you want to build new, exciting, innovative, competition-beating products and services quickly, how do you do it? You connect to third parties who can provide the components, the bricks that let you put these solutions together. Making more strategic use of data. Okay, so how do you make strategic use of data? You collect it, but as we heard earlier, it means nothing unless you do something with it. And it's the doing something with the data that generates the insight and the strategic value. How do you do that? Again, I'm just going to make the same point again. Do you employ armies of PhD data scientists and do everything in-house? No. Companies are not doing that. Connecting to third parties. How do they connect to third parties? Well, we shall see. Better collaboration with partners. Okay, so needing to work with partners better is a driver, a reason for taking part in an ecosystem. Okay, kind of obvious. Cost reduction or profit growth, as we put it to them. Cost reduction or profit growth. Again, no apologies for making the same point for the 15th time. Accessing something that somebody else has already built is generally cheaper and quicker than building that thing yourself. Better customer engagement, again, text is cut off. Better customer engagement, customer experience. I think that was basically it. Okay, so you can engage with customers, again, using tools available from external service providers, social media platforms, behavioral analytics, sentiment analysis, call center bots, etc. But also you can meet customers inside these ecosystems. So you are, by connecting to an ecosystem, you're connecting to suppliers, you're connecting to customers, and you come together in the same environment. Now, number one, the drum roll is revenue growth. So the number one, by a small margin, the number one driver of participation in some form of industry ecosystem is top-line revenue growth. Now, when I saw that, I thought, on the one hand, oh, how boring. On the second hand, I thought, oh, how exciting. Because it means that this has the mind, it has the attention, it has the eyes and ears of senior management within companies. And it puts any kind of proposition to construct an ecosystem, to run an ecosystem on a very sound business footing. If the top driver was, well, it's cool, or we don't know yet, but it's going to be important, it wouldn't be as solid. The number one driver for taking part in an ecosystem is to make more money. Okay, right, let's have a look at that in slightly more detail. We ask companies, do you feed an ecosystem? Are you a supplier into an ecosystem? Or are you a user of an ecosystem? Do you consume services from it? Or are you both? And I was a little surprised by this, to be honest. I was expecting, I didn't have a figure in mind, but I'm going to make one up anyway. I was expecting 80% of companies to say that they consume services from an ecosystem, and maybe 30%, 20-30% of companies saying that they supply services into an ecosystem. Actually, the picture is a little different. Just a little over half of all companies that take part in an ecosystem supply services into that ecosystem. In other words, they're making money from it. How much money? Well, we asked them to take their best guess. And companies that are supplying in this way tell us, if I had to think about it, that 16% of their total corporate revenue is in some way dependent on or derived from ecosystems. 16%. Okay. Now that doesn't mean that 16% of GE's revenue comes from Predix. That's not the case at all. But it means that on average, 16% of revenue involves the transaction of services and money that touches an ecosystem. And that figure, companies think will rise to 22%. Okay, so finger in the wind time, what's it going to be in 2 years? You know, we can't predict the future, but clearly the direction of travel is up. So going from 16 to 22% in 2 years, I'm an analyst, I love working with numbers, equates to annual growth of 19%. Okay, so what does that mean? That means that these companies expect the money that they get from their participation in an ecosystem to increase by 19% each year. If their overall corporate revenue is flat. Now, if your company is growing, that figure will be even higher because a growing proportion of a growing figure, surprise, surprise, is a big figure. Okay. Show this all at once because we've already seen these bars, okay? Each of the 5 industry segments on the left, the top 2 challenges that they told us they have, we've already seen these bars. Sorry, we've already seen these categories. What the numbers here represent is the proportion of companies in each sector that told us an interconnection ecosystem is going to be critical or very relevant in us solving these individual challenges. Okay. To do that, we had to explain the concept to respondents of an interconnection ecosystem, which we did. We tried to do that carefully. We tried to make sure that they understood what we were talking about. And the figures here, I think, are very strong. I think this is a very strong and positive response. Let's take a look at this one. Okay, so banking. Remember I said banking. And again, oh, okay, the writing has been cut off because of the change of font. Okay, banking, the number one issue was security, cybersecurity, DDoS, etc. Number two, secure connectivity to third parties. And I said at the time, this is what an ecosystem, an interconnection ecosystem is made for. And I think we see that reflected in the results here. So 48% of banks that we spoke to said that this form of ecosystem is critical to solving the problem of secure connectivity. Another 23% said it's very relevant. So, case proved? Well, I mean, it's kind of looking as if these platforms are, do have a role to play in solving some of the challenges that we see from industry. So we thought, well, now that we're having a good chat with respondents, we wanted to ask them. We wanted to say, you tell us what you want to see in such a platform. Now, we've had a chat about it. You know what we're talking about. We're doing this on behalf of a client who's building something along these lines. You tell us, what do you want to see from a platform like this? And what do you want to see from the type of company operating the platform? Again, a range of options. These are the top ones, the top 5. Okay, so these 5 are in no particular order. They were just the top 5 characteristics that companies want. Geographical diversity, a multi-country footprint. Remember, we spoke to very large companies, 1,000 plus, 5,000 plus. So no surprise, they want international, if not global, footprint. They want the company to be sustainable, have a long-term focus on providing interconnection, which is great, because a lot of companies that are talking about operating these platforms also operate many other types of platform, and they operate in many different areas. So what we take from this is that companies are looking for an operator or a provider that's in it for the long term, that basically takes this seriously. Okay. Programmable API access. The ability to connect to the platform and control it via software is important. And you can see why. Okay, so we're essentially moving towards the point where software, and I realize I'm going to use a phrase that I've heard and disparaged in the past, but I've never used myself, software will almost be able to write itself. If it can, through APIs into the interconnection platform, access services on demand, ad hoc, as it needs them, without being explicitly programmed. It needs to be robust, fault monitoring, no surprise there. And last, again, we're back to security. So end-to-end encryption. So, to finish off, we ask companies, just top level. We've had this chat. We've explained this concept to you that we're researching, okay, and that we're trying to find attitudes about. Now let's just take a step up and say, okay, you're building a hybrid cloud or a multi-cloud environment. Okay, so we're now talking about just standard IT, not industry specific. Okay, so hybrid IT, multi-cloud. Quick shot, how do you do it? What's your preferred approach? And we put these issues to them. Some of these are in-house developments, some of them are giving everything to a partner. So give everything to an outsourcer and let them decide. Is the least popular. Join an industry cloud. I mentioned GE Predix, probably the best example of an industry cloud. Use a telco's multi-cloud platform. So BT Cloud of Clouds, Verizon Secure Cloud Interconnect, NTT's cloud management platform, etc. Typically, they sit within the telco's IP VPN portfolio, so they're very much a network play for the telco. Great if you're already on the telco's WAN service, typically MPLS IP VPN. Standardize on one or two hyperscalers and use their ecosystem. In other words, stick to AWS or Azure or whoever. Use their services for as much as you can, and use technology and service providers that sit on that platform for as much as you can in order to build your solutions and solve your challenges. And that's, of course, that's what a lot of companies are doing now. Problem with that, apart from the fact that it's very easy to access, and you get access to a ready-made ecosystem, the problems are that if you can't find what you need, then you can be severely limited. And second, we're hearing more and more about the potential concerns around cloud lock-in. So if you invest too much or commit too much to one hyperscaler's platform, sounds a bit like IBM in the 1980s, doesn't it? Then you may feel that you're locked in. You don't have the ability to quickly, easily, and cheaply change to a different platform. 30% of companies are choosing that option. 28% of companies are choosing the option to build solutions themselves or with partners on a neutral interconnection platform. So, okay, so this is DE-CIX, if it's not clear. Okay. So you get the benefits of a wide choice of providers that you can connect to. Potentially, it's a kind of arbitrarily unlimited choice of providers, because wherever that interconnection platform is, you can connect to any of the providers that are on that platform, as opposed to being limited to either one data center or one physical cloud platform. So, okay, and to wrap up quickly, so we can have our aeroplane lunch, which I'm sure is going to be very nice, by the way. So to conclude, I thought the data, when we saw it, told a very simple story, and I thought that was nice because, again, as we heard about earlier, when you think about what science is. One thing I like about science is that, or one of the quotes or ideas behind science that make it so powerful, is that the more closely you look or examine an idea that happens to be true, the more light you shine on something, the more it is true. You can look at something in excruciating detail, and if it's true, it will still look true, no matter how closely you look at it. And I got a sort of bit of a feeling of that from this survey. It told a story, and it seemed pretty compelling to me. Okay, so the story is, each industry has its own challenges. Okay, so we've gone through those. Technologies that address those challenges are quickly becoming mainstream. Okay, big deal, so we know about that. But the more interesting thing is, where does that happen? Where do those technologies get accessed and implemented? Okay, within venues, places, locations that support the connection of the consumers to the suppliers of those technologies to build these solutions. And by the way, you can make money doing this. And then finally, as we saw on the previous slide just then, neutral interconnection platforms are up there as one of the two leading approaches that companies are taking to build these environments. Okay, thank you very much.